The wedding photograph arrived at the Pennsylvania Historical Society in Philadelphia during the spring of 2024, part of a large donation from the estate of Dorothy Morrison, whose family had lived in the coal mining regions of western Pennsylvania for over a century. Among dozens of family portraits and documents, archivist Dr. Rachel Coleman discovered a formal wedding photograph that would soon reveal one of the most shocking tragedies in Pennsylvania mining history. The sepia-toned image showed a joyful wedding party of 32 people arranged on the front steps of St. Mary's Catholic Church in Milfield, Pennsylvania. The date inscribed on the back read, October 15, 1898, Margaret O'Brien and Daniel McKenna. The bride, radiant in white lace, stood beside her groom, a sturdy young man in his finest suit. Around them, family members and friends smiled at the camera, their faces filled with hope and celebration. At first glance, it appeared to be a typical late Victorian wedding photograph, Dr. Coleman later explained. Everyone looked happy, prosperous despite the working-class setting. The men wore their Sunday best, the women their finest dresses. Children peeked out from between the adults, and even the church facade looked freshly painted for the occasion. The Morrison family records indicated that the photograph had belonged to Dorothy's grandmother, Sarah Morrison, who had lived in Milfield during the 1890s. A handwritten note tucked behind the photograph simply read, "The last happy day, SM 1898. What Dr. Coleman couldn't have known as she cataloged the donation was that everyone in this joyful wedding photograph would be dead within 12 hours of when it was taken. The investigation that followed would uncover a story of corporate greed, labor disputes, and a night of violence that had been deliberately erased from historical records. The tragedy of October 15, 1898, had been buried for over a century. Dr. Coleman's initial research into Milfield, Pennsylvania, yielded disturbing results. According to official records, the town had been abandoned in 1899 due to economic decline and mine exhaustion. But coal production records from the Pennsylvania Department of Mines told a different story. The Milfield mines had been among the most productive in the region throughout the 1890s. Something didn't add up, Dr. Coleman noted. A thriving mining town doesn't just disappear overnight because of economic problems. There had to be another explanation. Census records from 1900 showed that Milfield's population had dropped from 847 residents in 1890 to 0 in 1900. Immigration records indicated that many of the town's Irish and Polish families had arrived in the area during the 1880s, drawn by promises of steady work and fair wages at the Milfield Coal Company. The wedding photograph itself provided crucial clues about the town's prosperity. The clothing worn by the wedding party was of good quality, suggesting that the mining families were earning decent wages. The church appeared well-maintained, and several of the men wore pocket watches, signs of a community that was thriving, not struggling economically. Dr. Coleman found a reference to Milfield in a 1925 memoir by James Patterson, a former coal company executive. The events at Milfield taught us all a valuable lesson about the importance of maintaining proper labor relations. Some mistakes can never be undone, and some truths are better left buried. The cryptic reference led Dr. Coleman to investigate labor disputes in Pennsylvania coal country during the late 1890s. What she discovered was a pattern of increasingly violent confrontations between mine owners and workers across the region. The United Mine Workers of America had been organizing aggressively, and mine owners had responded with hired security forces and strikebreakers. But Milfield wasn't mentioned in any of the official labor dispute records, despite being surrounded by mines that had experienced significant unrest. Dr. Coleman's breakthrough came when she identified Daniel McKenna, the groom in the wedding photograph, through immigration records at Ellis Island. McKenna had arrived from County Cork, Ireland, in 1892 and had quickly found work at the Milfield mines. But employment records revealed something significant. McKenna had been fired from the mine in September 1898, just 1 month before his wedding. The reason for his dismissal was listed as agitation and incitement of fellow workers. Further investigation revealed that McKenna had been secretly organizing miners to join the United Mine Workers of America, attempting to establish the first union local in Milfield. A letter from McKenna to his brother in Boston preserved in the Immigration History Research Center, painted a picture of growing tension in the town. "The company knows what we're planning, Danny. They've brought in men from Pittsburgh, hard men who aren't here to dig coal. Margaret is frightened, but we can't back down now. The other families are counting on us." Dr. Coleman discovered that McKenna's organizing efforts had gained significant support among Milfield's miners. Working conditions at the mine were particularly dangerous, with a higher-than-average fatality rate and wages that had been cut 3 times since 1896. The miners were desperate for union representation. Company records, found in the archives of the Pennsylvania Coal Association, revealed that Milfield Coal Company owner Harrison Blackwood had been monitoring McKenna's activities through company spies. An internal memo dated October 10, 1898, stated, "The McKenna problem must be resolved permanently before it spreads to other company operations." The wedding between Margaret O'Brien and Daniel McKenna had been planned as a celebration, but it had also served another purpose. It was to be a secret meeting of union organizers from across western Pennsylvania. The guest list included miners from 5 different towns, all of whom were working to establish union locals in their communities. Blackwood and his associates saw the wedding as an opportunity to eliminate the union movement's leadership in one decisive action. As Dr. Coleman delved deeper into the records of the Milfield Coal Company, she uncovered evidence of a deliberate plan to eliminate the union organizers who would be gathering for the McKenna wedding. Harrison Blackwood had hired a private security firm from Pittsburgh, ostensibly to protect company property from labor agitators. The security firm, Brennan and Associates, specialized in breaking strikes and intimidating union organizers. Their methods were notorious throughout Pennsylvania's industrial regions, and they had been linked to several mysterious disappearances of labor leaders during the 1890s. A contract dated October 5, 1898, detailed the company's arrangement with Brennan and Associates. 12 men, fully armed and experienced in labor management, to be deployed to Milfield for the period of October 14 to 16, 1898. Compensation, $500 per man, plus bonus for successful completion of objectives. Dr. Coleman found a survivor's account buried in the personal papers of Father Michael O'Malley, the priest who had performed the McKenna wedding ceremony. Father O'Malley had written a confession letter in 1925, apparently intended for his bishop, but never sent. "I have carried this burden for 27 years. I should have warned them, should have canceled the ceremony. But I convinced myself that surely Christian men would not commit such acts on the Lord's day." According to Father O'Malley's account, armed men had been spotted around Milfield throughout the week preceding the wedding. Local residents had assumed they were railroad security or federal marshals investigating some unrelated crime. No, one suspected that they were preparing for a coordinated attack on the wedding celebration. The priest's letter revealed that he had been approached by a company representative the day before the wedding and told to keep the celebration brief and encourage guests to depart early. When Father O'Malley asked why, he was told that certain elements in the community were being monitored for seditious activities. "I was a coward," Father O'Malley had written. "I knew something terrible was being planned, but I was too frightened to act." Father O'Malley's confession letter provided a detailed account of October 15, 1898, the day that would end in unimaginable tragedy. The wedding ceremony had been held at 2:00 p.m. at St. Mary's Catholic Church, with the reception planned for the church hall immediately following the service. The ceremony was beautiful, Father O'Malley had written. Margaret looked radiant, and Daniel seemed to glow with happiness and determination. The church was filled with families from across the region, many of whom had traveled great distances to attend. Children played in the aisles while their parents sang hymns in Irish and Polish. The wedding photograph had been taken on the church steps immediately after the ceremony. Dr. Coleman was able to identify many of the faces through cross-referencing with immigration and employment records. The gathering included not just local Milfield residents, but union organizers from mines throughout western Pennsylvania. Among the wedding party was Thomas Sullivan, a prominent organizer from the anthracite fields, Maria Kowalski, who had been organizing the Polish miners in nearby Coaldale, and Patrick Murphy, who had led successful strikes in 3 different mining towns. The wedding had indeed served as a cover for what was essentially a regional union leadership conference. They thought they were safe, Dr. Coleman observed. A wedding celebration seemed like the perfect cover for their meeting. Who would suspect a bride and groom of harboring labor conspirators? Father O'Malley's letter described the reception as joyful and spirited. Traditional Irish and Polish music filled the church hall, and the miners shared stories of their organizing successes and challenges. Plans were made for coordinated strikes across multiple mines, with Daniel McKenna selected to serve as the regional coordinator. As evening approached, many of the wedding guests prepared to return to their hometowns. Those who lived in Milfield began walking to their houses, while out-of-town guests were invited to stay with local families or at the town's small boarding house. None of them made it home alive. Father O'Malley's confession provided the only surviving eyewitness account of what happened after the wedding reception ended at approximately 8 p.m. on October 15, 1898. The priest had remained at the church to clean up after the celebration when he heard the first gunshots echoing through the town. "At first I thought someone was celebrating with fireworks," Father O'Malley had written, "but the sounds were too sharp, too rapid. Then I heard the screaming, and I knew that evil had come to Milfield." From his position at the church, Father O'Malley witnessed armed men moving systematically through the town's streets. They were not random attackers, but organized professionals who had clearly studied the layout of Milfield and identified their targets in advance. The assault began simultaneously at multiple locations: the boarding house where out-of-town guests were staying, the homes of local union sympathizers, and the small tavern where some of the wedding guests had continued their celebration. The attackers used military-style tactics, surrounding each building and preventing escape. They were methodical, Father O'Malley wrote. These were not men acting in passion or anger. They moved with the precision of soldiers carrying out orders. Each team knew exactly where to go and what to do. Dr. Coleman found corroborating evidence in a Pennsylvania Railroad telegram log, discovered in the National Archives. A coded message sent from Milfield to Pittsburgh at 9:47 p.m. on October 15 read, "Shipment delivered successfully. All packages accounted for. Returning to depot tomorrow." The priest's account revealed that the massacre lasted approximately 2 hours. Families were systematically eliminated, with particular attention paid to anyone who had been identified as a union organizer or sympathizer. Children were not spared, nor were elderly relatives who posed no threat to company interests. Father O'Malley had hidden in the church basement throughout the attack, praying and listening to the sounds of systematic murder echoing through his parish. By midnight, Milfield had fallen silent. Father O'Malley's confession letter detailed the elaborate cover-up that followed the massacre, revealing how an entire town's population could disappear without triggering a federal investigation. The town's operation had been planned with the same precision as the murders themselves. When dawn broke on October 16th, they returned, Father O'Malley wrote. But now they came with wagons and shovels. They worked for 3 days, removing every trace of what had happened. Bodies, personal possessions, even furniture, everything disappeared. The cleanup operation involved more than just disposing of bodies. Company men systematically looted homes of anything valuable, while other items were burned in massive fires that could be seen from neighboring towns. Witnesses from nearby communities later reported seeing smoke rising from Milfield for several days. Dr. Coleman discovered shipping records indicating that several trainloads of mining equipment had been transported from Milfield to unmarked destinations in West Virginia and Kentucky during the week following the massacre. The timing and scale suggested that these shipments contained the belongings of the murdered families. The official story, propagated through friendly newspapers and government officials, was that Milfield had been evacuated due to dangerous mine conditions and potential cave-ins. Residents had supposedly been relocated to other company towns, though no documentation of these relocations was ever produced. Harrison Blackwood had used his political connections to ensure that no federal investigation was conducted. A letter from Pennsylvania Senator Marcus Thompson to the U.S. Bureau of Mines, found in Senate archives, stated, "The situation at Milfield has been resolved through appropriate corporate action. No federal intervention is necessary or desired. Father O'Malley had been allowed to live, but only after being given explicit instructions about his future behavior. They told me that if I ever spoke of what I had witnessed, my own parish in Pittsburgh would suffer the same fate as Milfield. He wrote, "I was a coward, but I was also a shepherd responsible for other flocks." The priest was transferred to a parish in Philadelphia within a month of the massacre, officially for health reasons. Dr. Coleman's investigation revealed that Father O'Malley was not the only survivor of the Milfield massacre. Through cross-referencing employment records and immigration documents, she identified at least 6 people who had left town before the wedding or had missed the celebration due to illness or work obligations. Sarah Morrison, whose family had preserved the wedding photograph, had been one of these survivors. Her personal diary, found among the family papers, provided additional details about the aftermath of the massacre and the conspiracy of silence that followed. "I returned from visiting my sister in Pittsburgh to find Milfield empty," Sarah had written in October 1898. "The company men told me there had been an evacuation due to mine dangers, but I knew better." Margaret McKenna's dress was still hanging on the line behind her house, and Daniel's work boots were still by the kitchen door. "People don't leave their most precious possessions behind when they evacuate." Sarah Morrison had been forced to sign a document stating that she had witnessed the voluntary evacuation of Milfield and agreed never to speak publicly about the events of October 1898. In exchange, she was given a job at a company mine in another county and a small payment for her cooperation. Other survivors had been similarly intimidated into silence. Dr. Coleman found records of payments made to 5 individuals by the Milfield Coal Company during November 1898, all for relocation assistance, in amounts that were substantial enough to ensure compliance. The survivors' conspiracy extended beyond those who had escaped the massacre. Family members of the victims in distant cities received visits from company representatives who explained that their relatives had died in mining accidents and that discussing the details would be harmful to ongoing investigations. Most devastating was Sarah Morrison's final diary entry about the massacre. "They made us choose between truth and survival. We chose survival, and 32 souls paid the price for our cowardice. Margaret McKenna's smile haunts my dreams. She was so happy that day, so full of hope for the future she would never see." Dr. Coleman's investigation into the cover-up revealed the systematic destruction of evidence that had hidden the Milfield massacre for over a century. The operation had been coordinated by Harrison Blackwood and involved corrupt officials at multiple levels of government. Church records from St. Mary's Catholic Church had been lost in a fire in December 1898, destroying all documentation of the McKenna wedding and the parish membership rolls that would have identified the victims. The fire had been attributed to a faulty heating system, but Father O'Malley's confession revealed that it had been deliberately set by company agents. Mine employment records for 1898 had been similarly destroyed in a warehouse accident in early 1899. Coal production records for Milfield had been altered to show declining output throughout 1898, supporting the official story that the mine had been exhausted and economically unviable. Most significantly, the entire town of Milfield had been physically erased. Dr. Coleman commissioned a geological survey of the area and discovered that the mine buildings, church, and residential structures had all been systematically demolished and buried. The site had then been landscaped to appear as natural woodland. "They didn't just kill the people," Dr. Coleman noted. "They killed the place itself. Milfield was erased from existence as if it had never been." Property records showed that the land had been transferred to a shell company controlled by Blackwood, then sold to the state of Pennsylvania for use as a forest preserve. The transaction had been handled by corrupt officials who ensured that no questions were asked about the previous use of the land. Dr. Coleman's most shocking discovery was a letter from Harrison Blackwood to a business associate found in the private papers of a Philadelphia banking family. Written in 1899, it revealed the cold calculation behind the massacre. The Milfield solution was expensive but effective. Word has spread through the mining communities, and organizing activities have ceased throughout our operations. Fear is more efficient than negotiation. The letter confirmed that the massacre had been intended not just to eliminate specific union organizers, but to terrorize the entire labor movement in Pennsylvania coal country. Dr. Coleman's investigation culminated in the publication of a comprehensive report that finally revealed the truth about the Milfield massacre 126 years after it occurred. The Pennsylvania Historical Society organized a memorial service at the site of the former town, attended by descendants of the victims and survivors. The wedding photograph of Margaret O'Brien and Daniel McKenna was enlarged and displayed as the centerpiece of the memorial. Each face in the photograph was identified through Dr. Coleman's research, and their names were read aloud during the ceremony. The youngest victim had been 3-year-old Timothy Sullivan. The oldest was 67-year-old Bridget O'Connell. This photograph captures the last moment of joy for these families, Dr. Coleman said at the memorial. They believed they were building a better future for themselves and their children. They died because they dared to hope for fair wages and safe working conditions. The Pennsylvania state legislature passed a resolution acknowledging the Milfield massacre and formally apologizing for the state's role in covering up the crime. A historical marker was installed at the site, listing the names of all 32 victims. Harrison Blackwood's business empire had collapsed during the Great Depression, and his descendants had no knowledge of their ancestors' crimes. When contacted by Dr. Coleman, they expressed horror at the revelations and donated money for a scholarship fund in memory of the Milfield victims. Father O'Malley's confession letter was made public for the first time, finally allowing the priest to find the absolution he had sought for decades after his death in 1943. The Catholic Church issued a formal statement acknowledging the Church's failure to protect its parishioners and apologizing for the decades of silence. The wedding photograph now hangs in the Pennsylvania Labor History Museum in Pittsburgh, a reminder of the price paid by working families who fought for basic human dignity. Margaret O'Brien. McKenna's smile, once a symbol of joy and hope, now serves as a memorial to all those who died that night in Milfield. Sarah Morrison's final words about the massacre proved prophetic. Some truths are too terrible to bury forever. Someday someone will remember our names and tell our story. That day finally came, 126 years later.